With convention-breaking hype, a small but passionate team trying to build a full-scale RPG, with delay after delay, and over 1 million copies sold, only to result in an unsatisfying flop shortly after release. This is What Went Wrong with Biomutant, an indie open-world kung fu style RPG set in a post-apocalyptic world ruled by rodents that is on the brink of collapse. I'm Wicked Wiz, being a man of my word and standing on your fan art. It's actually not bad. And I'd like to say a massive thanks to my Patreons who make videos like these sponsorless. The concept of Biomutant originally came from a crazy dream that the head of studio Stefan Ljungqvist had one night. From my 20-hour experience playing the game, it really is a full-on kung fu style RPG set in a world that's been devastated by the previous inhabitants' lack of care for the environment. Now, this isn't your typical post-nuclear war scenario. In fact, this world is littered by oil leaks, radiated, flaming hot, and freezing cold zones. All of the ruins scattered around the world act as mere remnants of what was, and are now home to mutated monstrosities. But the world is in a process of healing, and this big tree, the Tree of Life, is the key to that process. But something's wrong. It's in danger, and there are these massive creatures called World Eaters who are destroying it at the very roots. The population are now evolved rodents. There are 6 tribes for you to either join or conquer in the game that each have their own view on how the world should be run. Choice is a big thing in this game from the very start. From character customization to weapon crafting to vehicles, and a karma system where you have a choice between good and evil. You'll meet a bunch of unique characters along the way, as well as bountiful loot. There are a whole bunch of cool things in this game, but a lot of it becomes quite repetitive, and many people felt that the world was kind of bland. Before we dig deep into what's wrong about the game, we first need to know what happened in development. And thankfully, before even starting the video, one of the developers behind Biomutant offered to give some insight into what was actually quite a secretive process. There's no interview or anything like that, and for what I hope are obvious reasons, they'll remain anonymous. So for now, we'll just call him Steve. Smash like for Steve. Our development journey starts with the company called Experiment 101. Founded in the summer of 2015 by both Goodbye Kansas Game Invest, now Amplifier Game Invest, and the previously mentioned ex-Avalanche studio employee Stefan Ljungqvist, who is by no means a rookie within the industry, as he previously worked on the much underrated game Mad Max, as well as Just Cause. So they have a lot of experience and connections within the industry, and after working in some pretty big companies, Stefan wanted to try something a bit different when it came to development. Developer Steve mentioned that the team started off really small and pretty much got stuck into development straight away. There wasn't much pre-production, but there was still an idea from Stefan and the team of what the game could be. At this point in time, there were only really 5 people working on this game already, prototyping away, coming up with new ideas, testing things out, seeing what sticks. But there is one thing that will become very apparent in this whole cycle, is that this team would remain pretty damn small throughout the whole project. Similar to any indie studio with a lot of ambition, the work environment was full-paced. Long hours were quite common, but overtime was always paid, none of which enforced, as some would do their 9 to 5 and go home, while others would burn the midnight oil. It was a very busy studio from what I heard, and it kind of makes sense with only 5 people at the time, but the culture seemed quite open and accepting of differing opinions to choices being made. This was no dictatorship, everybody had a voice, and everybody worked together. On paper, it was a flat organization, meaning that there wasn't much middle management between the devs and Stefan. There was autonomy amongst the devs, but no leads for specific areas in development, and no real workload division either. Others could have their input, and decision making would typically come down to an agreement amongst the whole team, rather than just one person owning that and having the final say. A year later, in the summer of 2016, the team would then grow to around 12 people in total, all of which working tirelessly on prototypes and new on-the-fly features. The way they worked was pretty much like this. Stefan or someone else would come up with a cool sounding idea or new feature to add to the game. They would then develop it, test it on the couch at the end of the week, and then decide if it needed fixing or to scrap it entirely. A lot of the development process behind this company isn't anything new. A lot of it's very much trial trial by fire, but this way of working does become a bit of an issue later on and probably explains why a lot of things didn't go too right. Interestingly enough, this game was originally said to be more of a top-down Diablo-style experience, but over time they found themselves zooming the camera into the world more and more that they eventually had to have a vote between the developers to decide if this game should be a third-person or top-down experience. And of course, as we already know, third person got the vote. I just really wish I could have seen at least some examples of this or show you guys some examples, because I think a lot of us would have much preferred a Kung Fu Panda Diablo sim than this shit. While development was going on with the game, Experiment 101 also managed to land a publishing deal with THQ Nordic, as I'm told that the founders had some pretty good connections with them, and this relationship would develop into something else entirely later on. All of this progress sounds great, but not much was really seen of the game in this time. And to be honest, things were so secretive that nobody really knew about this project in the first place. However, all of this would change about a year later with the first tweet on the official Biomutant account announcing that they would be at Gamescom in August of 2017, and a day later would post this trailer on the official IGN channel, which of course quickly gained a lot of views, and the response was overly positive. Now, little did the guys know that the attention surrounding this game would be nothing short of impressive. Their stand was quickly surrounded by people who eagerly wanted to try out the game. The queue was massive and the wait time was up to nearly 4 hours. Of course, this isn't an uncommon thing to see at conventions like this, but for a game that has barely any awareness surrounding it, only really spilling the beans just before the event is honestly really impressive for such a small and new studio. It was so crazy that the developers ended up being hassled by the event managers and also some security. And I quote from Steve, one of the THQ booth managers, jokingly said, "I hate you guys, you made my life a living hell." It's a pretty good problem to have, right? Being one of the most popular games there, where people were literally waiting hours just to play it. But all of this made one thing very clear, that this game would sell. Now, it's important to say that there wasn't much of a deadline for this game initially. The general consensus within the team was that the game isn't ready until everybody's happy with it. Simply put, it's not done until it's done, like a lot of my videos. Yet, in an interview still at Gamescom, Stefan ran through more details about Biomutant, as you do, but was naturally asked about a release date. And he said this.
Congrats on Biomutant. I don't even know where to begin. There's so much cool stuff in this game. Do you have anything along the lines of a release date, platforms, anything like that yet?
Next year.
Next year.
PS4, Xbox One, PC.
Okay, cool.
So, sometime in 2018. Great. The newly formed fan base had something to look forward to, and the guys seemed pretty confident that they would achieve this rather vague goal. The problem is, though, with all the positive reception and new gained confidence for the project, the guys at Experiment decided to experiment further by expanding the scope. For example, they would end up doubling the map size from 4x4 kilometers to 8x8, extend the quest line, add and test even more features, and also make a whole load of changes / upgrades to already existing features. So we now have a release window for sometime in 2018, which could be anywhere between January to December, and even more work to do. A few months later after this, THQ Nordic went from their publisher to eventually acquiring shares in a deal that would own both the studio and the intellectual property of Biomutant. Stefan's original fear of being bought out was a lack of creative freedom. He really didn't like the idea of being controlled by a bigger company, being pressed for deadlines and adding in things that they never really wanted to do. However, with clear terms in place, they achieved a really good deal. From my conversations with Steve, working with THQ Nordic didn't really impact development so much. It was very hands-off, which, to be honest with you, isn't something we hear all too often. And I was actually quite impressed that Stefan just stood his ground and said, no, we're going to do it this way, we're going to keep the creativity free, and we're going to work on our terms. And with this freedom, the guys were still prototyping new ideas, new features, and all that, while THQ Nordic would essentially provide a massive marketing machine to gain a lot more exposure for this game. 2018 would be considered the year of mass exposure, with convention after convention after convention, with massive queues at Gamescom again, and a fan base that only seemed to be ever growing. Because Experiment 101 was bought by THQ Nordic, The resources to do this increased massively, with the developers being able to crack on with the game, attend some events here and there, while THQ and their team would pretty much go to the rest. The great thing about conventions is that people get to try out the game. There's usually a demo and you have to play through it, which is great and all, but there's a catch. To actually experience the game, you have to attend one of these conventions. There would be gameplay footage online, but not really much in the way of a downloadable demo. It was an active choice to keep the experience contained at events like these. I mean, we're all quite used to seeing alphas, betas, or early access. Yet Biomutant remained quite traditional in their approach. The issue here is that although first-hand feedback is great, people never got a chance to explore further than the allotted time. The great thing about a downloadable demo is that people get a chance to dig deeper and point out issues or raise concerns pretty early on, and well before release date. The lack of significant user research is something that can make or break a game way before release. To be fair, I was informed that they would bring in friends, family, and other people within the industry to test out their game, and they would frequently test it out themselves. But it's still quite a small pool of people to get feedback from. And the reason why I'm bringing all of this up is that it explains why a lot of people felt that this was a slightly different game to what they were expecting. Now remember, this is the year of 2018, and it's now coming towards the end of the year, and people are starting to wonder if this game is ever going to be released. We were given a really rough estimate of 2018, just 2018, no months, no day, but people were expecting to see some kind of announcement for an actual release date. However, there wasn't really any response. It seemed to have been forgotten, or that they knew it wasn't going to happen and would just hope to push it back when people complained. THQ did pitch in, and they said that the game would be released a year later in the summer of 2019, so we'll see how that turns out. But it's clear that with the extended scope and all the different things being added to the game and being fixed, that the team wasn't really ready. To be fair, at this point they are still a small team, but there is one thing that really did worry me about the development process behind this game when talking to Steve. It's great that they were adding a whole bunch of different things, new features and stuff, but like I said earlier, they would come up with a cool idea, test it out, and see if it fits in the game. The issue is that the features being added weren't really planned beforehand, and they essentially worked within their own little bubble. They knew that these features would have to complement with other areas in the game and also have to interlink with other features along the way, but this seemed to be more of an afterthought, and we'll look at that in a lot more detail later on when you see my experience of this game. The year is now 2019, the guys are still cracking on, conventions are still being attended, but coming up to summertime, people again were becoming quite concerned that this game would miss another release date. I mean, to be fair, there was never much of a release date anyway. That would imply that there was a day that it would be released, but still, the game wasn't ready and people were starting to ask questions. Personally, I don't think delays are the worst thing. I think the reason why people get upset about them isn't so much as that they don't get the game sooner, it's that they just feel deceived. It's another broken promise. And if you know anything about the gaming industry, if there are delays upon delays, people start to worry that this might turn out to be another No Man's Sky or some other game with multiple delays that turned out to be pretty bad.
Is this game worth it? Does that answer your question?
As gamers, we've been pretty scarred over the years, so even after hearing about 2 delays on a game that we quite like or quite hyped for, you start to worry if this is going downhill before it's even started. However, hype for the game was still there, and they were showing significant improvements. It was very clear that these guys were just trying to put more into the game and getting it to a place where they felt comfortable releasing it. And it's something that I really appreciate about this studio is that they really don't want to rush things, they want to try and put out the best they possibly can. Now, I already know that there's going to be a few people saying, why didn't they bring more people in? At this point, they had around about 20 developers, and it was still a very ambitious project. Well, Stefan explains exactly why here.
You want to keep the team small.
Yeah. And I want to have not more people, I wanted to work with the right people. So let's not stress it. Let's find the right people.
To be honest with you, I agree with Stefan in this case. You honestly want to find the right people for the job. It's not just about the skill set, it's also about the chemistry. But I do wonder what things would have been like if there were more staff as well as development leads. 2020 was a tough year for obvious reasons. The impact from lockdown, though, didn't really seem to hinder them much, as these guys were based in Stockholm and Sweden didn't really seem to have much of a lockdown anyway. They still had funding, worked from home, and simply just cracked on. However, things did kind of go a bit silent, at least until June, with the IGN Summer of Gaming, where we have an interview of Stefan describing the game, all the new things about it that they've been working on, and also the challenges that they're currently facing. But in this point of development, they're now starting to refine more things, and they are still changing stuff, but they're also fixing a lot of bugs. They were also aware that promising a release date again probably wouldn't be the best idea. So simply, no release date was announced. June and July were the most active months of this year, with more in-depth interviews along with a Discord channel being announced by THQ Nordic. But then it was silent. There was a post about languages in November, but besides that, nothing. The studio kind of fizzled out from social media, and hype sort of died down as people weren't sure as to if this game would ever be released. But that would all change, as finally, on January the 26th of 2021, in an official Twitter post, a set launch date was confirmed for the 25th of May 2021. This was the first confirmed release date. There was a day, there was a month, and there was a year. It's clear that the team were towards the end of development, patching bugs, finalizing small things, and surely confident that they'll actually release the game. With all the revived hype, Experiment 101 came out with a proper response as to why they were so silent for the past few months. Stefan says, "It's been a huge amount of work for QA, because it's not easy in an open world game to find them. And then once they've been found, we have to fix them. And that puts some additional challenge on us, being a small team. Any game is going to ship with smaller bugs. But I'm talking about bugs that are truly disruptive to the game experience. We don't want to ship with that. I think that's what's caused us to just wait until we're ready to do it." This is quite a respectable statement. And the best thing about this is that THQ Nordic never twisted their arm to crunch overtime in order to rush the game out. They also supported them throughout the quality assurance process, with a dedicated team to comb through the game. And that's something that you don't hear about all too much in the industry. Indie teams just being able to work on it at their own pace, and not being set a deadline by the parent company. Also, Stefan knows martial arts, so I don't think they really wanted to mess with him anyway. Coming up to launch day, the marketing was impressive to say the least. Paying PewDiePie a fair amount of money to endorse the game on a stream that ran for about 4 hours. And even Conan, of all people. I mean, I don't watch the guy, I barely know the guy, but I know he's very famous and he plays games every now and then. So publicity was skyrocketing. But here's the question, did the game release or did it not? Well, it's the 25th of May, and yeah, it released. They sold over 1 million copies, each at the price of about 55 quid, which is about $60 in USD. This pricing did cause a bit of an issue. The reason why they made it that price is so that they could recoup on investment, which is fair enough, but it's AAA pricing for what is essentially an indie game made by a small studio. But besides that, there weren't really too many issues with launch day. I mean, people who pre-ordered the Mercenary class had some trouble unlocking it, but that was quickly resolved. And it wasn't really a pre-order only item either. You could buy it as a DLC for cheap, which kind of sucks, but it literally is their only DLC besides a soundtrack. I mean, one of the philosophies around this game that is essentially a looter shooter in a lot of ways with a lot of loot boxes is that they didn't believe in microtransactions, which again, I'll say it, if they ended up with a Kung Fu Panda Diablo game with no microtransactions, oh boy, did they miss an opportunity. Now, there was an issue with the next-gen consoles not being able to really play in 4K, but that would be the least of the issues, because of course, after a few hours of people actually playing the game, it didn't take all too long to realize that this wasn't all it was hyped up to be. Reviews came in with more critical ones calling it mediocre, that it had a bland story, it being a good example of what happens when someone makes a Ubisoft game without Ubisoft resources, and a lot of the criticism boils down to it feeling a bit like a half-finished product and very repetitive. Now, there were of course people who loved the game for what it was, but still noted the glaring issues such as the skin-deep features and, again, the repetitive nature throughout the campaign. We can sit here all day looking at reviews, but it's now June of 2022, a whole year later after release. So the question is, what's the game like now? Well, I can tell you straight away that for 55 quid, the price doesn't really match up with the final product in terms of value. I was honestly expecting a lot more from this game, and I didn't even know about the team size before making this video. So with a price tag like that and a very flashy looking trailer, I assumed that this was another AAA game by THQ Nordic. Let's start off with exploration. This is an RPG after all, so exploration is a big part of the experience. There are loads of different places to explore and loot. The world is beautiful and I did enjoy my adventures to new lands. There's a nice mix between grand decaying structures, hot and cold zones, vibrantly toxic areas, oil-ridden wastelands, bomb-filled lakes, underground complexes, and a few unique regions. When exploring the world, I would often get distracted, and then I'll see a petrol station. And because this game teaches you very early on that you can pretty much loot any place, you'll always be looking for that next component or next clothing item. Although I did feel like the journey between locations like this felt a bit lifeless at times. It was almost like the action would only really be surrounded in either ruins or just different structures. The roads in between, you might find a few NPCs fighting, maybe some tribe wars here and there, and the odd furry trying to convert you to a life of hedonism. But that was never much of an issue. In fact, I've had quite a few unique encounters. Like this one right here where I stumbled across a burning village. It was under attack by a rival tribe, so I decided to help out. After wiping them out and watching this guy continuously drown for about 5 minutes, I was given this short side quest to help rebuild the town, which is actually a really nice feature. You're not just coming in here to help and then leave. You can also win good karma points by helping them rebuild. Although the quest itself was honestly just fetch this, fetch that, go here, cut some wood, go there, cut some wood, but it felt good. I felt like I did something. I felt like I actually made a difference in this world. Some places that you explore are just loot dumps, but others have mini bosses and special items. After defeating the boss, I found this weird gooey liquid that I of course touched, and thanks to that I was able to change my body shape, giving myself a massive head. There's also this whole northern area in the map. It's this hot, dry wasteland with a lot of cool little places to explore, and in it I managed to obtain a balloon, which I could only really seem to use in this area, and this, along with the weird mutation, I could only really find them after deviating from the questline. Now this world is massive and there is a lot to explore, but the motivation to do so very quickly wears off. And to be honest with you, it's to do with a whole combination of things. Let's start with the problems behind the story. The story was arguably one of the weakest parts in this game. I get that they worked hard on it, like most things, but after what was quite an interesting start, being introduced to the first World Eater, seeing the devastation that it would cause, meeting the first tribes, it all just started to feel a bit meh. Especially with the way that they tell the story through these characters. You'll quickly come to realize that the dialogue feels more like an assortment of fortune cookies than anything else. It's quite a dramatic statement, but most of the dialogue would just go on about the future of the world, the past, and moral choices. It's okay in chunks, but it ends up feeling like everyone is saying the same thing over and over again, just in a slightly different way. As I've mentioned before, everyone speaks a sort of gibberish, and this is then kind of narrated by the narrator. Now, I know a lot of people didn't really like the narrator too much. Personally, I think he sounds a lot like Stephen Fry.
You shouldn't challenge someone that has nothing left to lose.
So I did get a Little Big Planet vibe every now and then, but he's not too much of an issue because you can turn him off. I do really wish that they had multiple voice actors, and the reason why is that I feel like the narration kind of takes away from the personality behind each of these characters. You can see them expressing themselves a little bit here and there, and the way they look, and even the pitch of their gibberish, but with the narration being the same for everybody, the emotion that conveys is also the same. There's not really much of a difference. Moving on, there are 3 main story quests that all kind of interlink, and are all required to complete for the end credits. You have the story about your past as a child, where you complete these flashbacks that were okay for storytelling, but kind of boring to play. They also came with these flashbacks that you get upgrades for your little automaton, where as a child, you're being attacked by an adult. And it doesn't matter if you win or lose, you'll still get the upgrade, so it's totally pointless. And then you have the tribe wars, which are a whole other issue that we'll touch on later. And finally, the questline for saving the Tree of Life. Remember when I said choice was a big thing in this game? I like to sell it the way that the developers would sell it, because now I can tell you how meaningless a lot of the choice is within this game. For example, you can make a choice at the beginning to join one of 2 tribes. The Jagni, who wish to destroy the Tree of Life and start anew, or the Myriad, who would like to keep it alive so nobody else dies. Here's a big spoiler. it doesn't really make a difference to your gameplay whatsoever. You see, the Jagni tribe wants to use the World Eaters to destroy the Tree of Life, whereas the Myriad wishes to defeat them. And being totally off-brand, I chose to go with the good guys, the Myriad tribe. So of course my mission was to kill the World Eaters. But after completing the game, I had a look online to see how the Jagni tribe would actually use the World Eaters to destroy the tree. And get this right, for some reason, you still need to defeat the World Eaters, but instead of them just being dead, they just go back to munching on the tree. It makes absolutely no sense. And being allied with the Myriad, you just kill them. It's exactly the same experience either way, minus just a slightly extended cutscene. And it doesn't make sense anyway. You just leave them to it. They're already doing a good job. You don't need to beat up the poor World Eaters just to show them who's boss. The main thing that really killed it for me with the story is the amount of repetition. People said it in the reviews. I didn't see the reviews before playing the game, but looking at them now, I totally understand why a lot of people just felt a bit let down. Most of the quests are essentially fetch this, speak to that. A good example is that each boss quest follows a very similar formula, of which you need to build either a mech, boat, submarine, or find some unique mount that has the weirdest face I think I've ever seen on a creature ever, and each one pretty much has the same kind of quests. First, you need to speak to somebody in charge of the mission. They'll go get you to collect an item for whatever you need to build, so you'll go collect the item and then you'll return back to them, and then they'll ask you to go and collect another item somewhere else, and it's essentially rinse and repeat until you've built the thing and then you fight the boss. It is fun the first couple of times because you get to explore the world as you go, but later on I'll just find myself hopping between fast travel points, making the whole thing seem pointless. When it comes to repetition, tribe wars have a similar issue. To beat a tribe, you need to take out 3 strongholds before storming the headquarters. Each stronghold has its own strategy, where you either go in balls blazing with the lads and defeat enemies in a combination of combat and simple puzzles, or sabotage something like their water supply, artillery, or take the stronghold by disturbing a moth's nest. Yeah, I'm not joking. I took over a stronghold with moths. Or you'll be given the chance to challenge the stronghold leader by either persuading them to join you, which for some reason I could do very easily. I guess it must have been my commando class or something like that. Or you can challenge them head on and defeat their champion. Now, there are about 5 other tribes, and with that, about 15 strongholds to defeat. But what happens when you go to war with the leader? Well, this is the strangest part. Each time you'll have an army ready for battle, but you first have to speak to your leader, where he'll then tell you to go fetch something like a torch or a helmet. I mean, as if my helmet isn't already good enough, and come on man, who in this army doesn't have a torch? Either way, you grab said items and you'll use them to get over the wall or breach the gate. And then it's the same thing. You'll fight a whole bunch of rodents, do some basic puzzles, and finally encounter the rival leader. And you do all of this on your own. You have this massive army and even some cutscenes where you see somebody else coming in with you, but then you're just on your own fighting all these enemies. It's almost like you just have this army outside, I guess, to come in when things get real bad. But of course, that's never going to happen anyway. The only time your tribe helps out is when you're actually fighting the leader. It's just these little things on top that don't really make sense. The funniest part about all of this is that you can avoid the fight by just persuading them to join, and again, there was no issue doing this. I could have literally done this for every leader, but I chose to fight them because that's more fun.
He's so raw. He didn't expect it would go down this way. It'll be hard to talk your way. He's not sure if you're likable enough to just... He realizes a peaceful end would be best. He'll
Persuasion in this game is essentially a speedrunning strat at this point, because the outcome is always the same. The issue with the tribes though is that the formula is pretty much recycled again and again. Each stronghold within a region looks the same, like literally, internally, everything looks the same besides the headquarters. The dialogue when you defeat any stronghold is always the same. The leader just looks mad at you and says this.
He says you made them weaker, but they won't give up. He says you made them weaker, but they won't give up. He says you made them weaker, but He says you made them weaker, but they won't give up.
All in all, I went from loving the whole tribe system to absolutely hating it. Now, this game in a lot of ways is a bit of a looter shooter, and looting is fun. at first, but mid to end game it does again become a bit of a chore. This game doesn't feel all too balanced in a lot of ways. Maybe I was lucky, but early on I found a pretty OP weapon. I couldn't use it for a bit because I wasn't a high enough level, but the moment I reached that level, my curiosity to explore further and actually find more things quickly diminished. It's not that I'm expecting to get really lucky and get the best loot every single time. It's just that there is so much loot to find in this game, but when you get to a certain point, a lot of it's pretty much junk. And you'll end up recycling most of the things you get anyway. It kind of sucks as well because I found a lot of cool things, but I could never really justify either wearing them or adding them to my weapons because I already had something with much better stats. Although none of this really did stop me from actually looking around for new stuff. I was still curious to check out new areas, but I would quickly find myself focusing less on doing that and more on just trying to complete this game. This brings me on to crafting, which is probably one of the most fun aspects behind this game. It honestly feels limitless, and I really like the fact that you can pretty much create your own weapon from scratch. You can start with a base component and then add a whole bunch of different things onto it. And this game does have a little bit of tongue-in-cheek because I've never played a game before where you can quite literally use a banana as a handle for a knife. The issue behind crafting though is that it's essentially a game of adding anything with the highest DPS. There didn't seem to be many limitations for simply just adding stuff with a higher damage output. Some stats might decrease, but never really enough to justify using something else. When it actually comes to customization in this game, I have to say they've done a pretty damn good job. Being able to customize your character from the start is fairly standard with RPGs, but I like how your genetics or the way you look directly impact your stats. I also really like the fact that it doesn't really matter what class you pick, because none of the weapons are class locked, so you have the choice to play in whatever way you wish. And although I didn't bother much with it, I like the idea of customizing your mech or boat, even though you only really need to use them in specific areas and where fast travel isn't available between quests. It's still a nice added bonus to say the least. Let's talk about combat. This is the one bit where I really wish the frame rate on the footage was better, because combat is full of different combos for each weapon type and you can have a lot of fun with it. Not to mention the mutations that you can evolve, as well as the psi abilities which you unlock from their karma system, or should I say aura. To be honest, I did find that a lot of the abilities were useless, but the mucus ball, that was fun. Just sticking enemies to it and launching them into water every single time. It's one of the first mutations you get and probably one of the best. Although I'll be honest, combat got dry pretty fast. You could go face to face and have fun with it, but instead you'll naturally find yourself kiting most enemies. I wouldn't do this all the time, but when there was a bigger enemy, and the fact that pretty much everyone is a bullet sponge in this game, it's just so easy to circle around them and just dodge a million times while doing these cool slow-mo moves. And although fighting earlier on is pretty fun because you have kind of weak weapons, so you need to just get in there and get your hands dirty, when you get a really good weapon like a really good gun, it's very easy to switch into the kite meta. Also, there was this weird glitch where enemies can't enter buildings, and I had this experience multiple times. I actually wondered if enemies could enter buildings at all, so I used my trusty mucus ball, stuck a bunch of fur bags to it, and took them inside. And yeah. They just kind of float there. This was pretty damn weird to see, and I did ask as to why they probably didn't fix it. There's an issue to do with pathfinding within buildings, so I guess they never really got round to fixing it and just kind of left it there. So even in situations like this where enemies could clearly get through the garage door, you just kind of have this weird standoff where they're not really attacking you, they're just kind of like looking at you, and they would shoot every now and then. And to be fair, this was the only bug I encountered in the game. I was actually really impressed that this was the only thing I could complain about when it comes to the quality. Now, there's a lot more that I could say about the game for this review segment, but the most glaring issues that both I found as well as a lot of people largely come down to the repetitive nature of it all. Altogether, these were the things that stuck out to me the most. None of it is terrible or even that bad at first, but after experiencing the game myself, I now get why a lot of people felt that it was kind of boring and a bit mediocre. In the beginning, where I was learning new things, exploring the world, going deep underground just to find some new rare loot, that to me was the most fun I had in this game. Exploring this vibrant world, defeating the first and second World Eater, getting really excited to upgrade my weapon and craft new things, all of that was awesome. It just got too repetitive and things really just dry up towards the end. It's like a sad semi. It's about halfway there, but you can't really do much with it. In contrast to what I've said, I think this game is well made in a lot of ways, but I do also think it could have been better planned. There are a lot of of different things that sort of feel skin deep and kind of thrown in there. And we pretty much know why after looking at the development process. It was clear that they were just constantly prototyping, not really planning things. They were just kind of coming up with cool ideas, adding them in, seeing if they would fit. And if it does, then would figure out how it would complement the rest of the game. Speaking with Steve was a massive eye-opener, and they were nothing more than helpful and honest to the research behind Biomutant. Not much was known about the game in early development, and even in the public eye, we only really heard from Stefan about the inner workings behind development. So, thank you, Steve, for giving us the insight that we needed. But besides the AAA price tag, all I could really see from this studio is a lot of hard work with quite an ambitious title and a lot of passion behind this project. It was clearly a risk sticking with a small team. From what I heard, development wasn't all too organized, hence why a lot of things feel like they've been thrown in, and I really do wonder how this game would have turned out if none of that was the case. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. If you made it all this way towards the end, why not subscribe? And I'd also like to say again a massive, massive thanks to my Patreons, and also a special thanks to my Wicked Slayers and Cyber Wizards. The FBI, Chase R. Melvin, Negadan, Noah Heisman, and Sebastian. Also Alex Caprol, Alf Martin, Artistical, Basto, Daddy Fabianski, Enchanted Dreamer, Finra, Gibbles by the Dozen, Kex, Lynn Kerr, Mark Nen, Mr. Pine, Rare Alex, Spooky, and Tristan McGowan. And I'll see you in the next one where I stand on your CPU?